Hello there, Beard. When are you gonna do some guides? Good question, Crowalosh. It has been a while, hasn't it? So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, get prepared to get wet. As a status effect, wetness is one of the very few to impact darn near every survivor equally, apart from Wirt and WX, that is. It is also very simple to understand and counter. However, today is not about that. It's about listing the sources, as well as detailing how it impacts us, our items, and the environment. So, let's get to it. Right to it, in fact. For you see, come 35 wetness and above, our weapons/tools become slippery. Resources like logs, grass, twigs, etc. become waterlogged or soggy. Clothing that isn't already water resistant will become soaked, and our foodies will get soggy. And all these prefixes may mean the same thing essentially, yes. However, each leads to their respective items being less effective in their fields. And this is where I'd like to start today, breaking down how wetness messes with our inventory. But we should note how wetness affects the environment around us first, and how we can actually tell when the world will be wet. Soggy portions of turf will appear all around. Some trees even appear darker than normal, and best of all, the text detailing most anything in the game will appear blue. So keep all that in mind. And all that said, let us begin with what wet fuel means for us potentially. Any waterlogged fuel or fuel-like resources see their burn time efficiencies drop to but 75%. Logs, for example, go from 90 seconds of burn time each to only 67.5, and this decrease in efficacy applies to all fuel types that get wet. So, the more you know. As annoying as the fuel thing could become, once soaked clothing comes into play, things kinda take a turn for the worse. As long as the wearable item is not already resistant to wetness, it will become soaked come 35 wetness and above. And while they will do little to us while they sit in our inventories, each equipped item that is soaked will add to a negative sanity drain for as long as it is on. So obviously, the more wet clothing you have on, the worse it will be for you. However, it does actually get worse, as not only does the game tack on another minus 3.3 sanity per minute drain come 100 wetness, high wetness in general equals lower temperatures, and low temperatures could mean freezing. So add freezing to the mix and anticipate even more sanity loss on top of a health drain. So yup, you really do not want to mess with wetness. And don't worry, we will actually talk the best ways to fight it soon. But for now, we have a meal to eat. It won't be a long meal, but it will be one nonetheless. And what I'm trying to say horribly is that food will become soggy eventually, if not contained, or if you're not just preventing wetness overall. And this is bad because soggy food spoils 30% faster than normal. So get them munchies in a storage container or wear some wetness resistance, especially come spring. But yes, everyone, a very important note to take is this. All items that can potentially get wet can be kept fully dry within containers, and this does include backpacks, by the way. This is an absolutely huge deal. Remember it and use the knowledge to your advantage. And while this shouldn't surprise anyone, also use fires to your advantage, as standing near them will accelerate the draining of wetness for both our person and any wet inventory items that we may have. But it must not be still raining. But what will end up surprising you is the weapon that will fly out of your hand come high wetness, or the tools slipping from your grip in the middle of a resource gathering. Once weapons and tools become slippery, there is a chance for them to both fly out of our hands when we use them. For all characters, besides Wirt. That said, the game must have known that I was trying to get a shot of it happening and ended up trolling me at the end of the day, as I spent a literal half hour trying to get it to happen across 3 separate characters. But trust me, it is a thing. Weapons and tools will fly out of your hand come high wetness, and can be truly annoying in combat especially. But speaking of Wirt, let me reiterate that weapons and tools will not slip from her grip even if she's at 100 wetness potentially. However, Wirt has one more thing up her wet sleeve. Upon sinking to Davy Jones's locker, Wirt will keep her full inventory, unlike the others. She will see no other stats impacted by the experience, and she will only gain 50 wetness over the usual 100. Not bad. But finally, wet structures, environment, and mobs. But mostly mobs, really. The world will simply get wet right alongside you, and wet trees and all that nonsense will just burn less efficiently. That's really all there is to it. But with wet mobs, they give us the opportunity to use electrical damage from morning stars, electrical darts, and or volt goat jelly in order to deal 1.5 times more damage to them. Unfortunately, until of course Clay makes it so water balloons make all things wet, taking true advantage of all this only comes during spring or through killing mobs that are always considered wet, like tentacles or depth worms for example. Still, it's good to know. So alright then. After all that, it's time to talk sources of wetness, like rain for example. Who would have thunk it that literal water falling from the sky would lead to things down below getting wet? And would you believe it, that the heavier it rains, the wetter everything gets. Yup, good stuff. The highly fashionable fashion melon actually causes wetness to rise when worn. However, the maximum it will get us to is but 33 total, which isn't even enough to cause any item to become wet. Still, it's good to know that even player crafts can cause the effect. Especially when there are crafts like the ice cube for example, that not only raises wetness way faster over the melon, the maximum wetness it will reach is now 50 over 33. More than enough to cause items within our inventories to get wet, which, if we are not careful, will do way more harm than good. So keep that in mind come the next summer heat you have to battle, because you shouldn't get too complacent with wearing a bloody cube on your head. Speaking of ice, chunks of the cold stuff can actually melt within your inventory if you are not careful or you're around heat sources for too long. And if they do, your wetness can potentially skyrocket in an instant. Wetness will increase by 2 points for every piece of melted ice. So, 40 ice could become 80 wetness immediately. So, be very mindful there. As alluded to earlier, water balloons cause wetness, but frustratingly, it's only for other players, Dragonfly, and us potentially. That said, each balloon will raise wetness by 20. But will instantly drop your temperatures by 5 as well, which is not good. Change what balloons can make wet though, and all will be good. Paddling with an oar too quickly will cause a splash that gives the player 9 wetness each time. But you have to literally spam click so fast for it to happen, so I really wouldn't worry about it. And finally, being called to your grave at sea will not only see most of the characters lose their items, their wetness will instantly hit max. Stats will be impacted, and the freezing will likely set in fast. Not good. Also note that getting hit by one of the very few sources of waves in Don't Starve Together will also increase wetness. Yup, water is wet. What a novel concept. But now, preventing and fighting wetness. Fire does the trick, however it doesn't help if it's still raining, so we're gonna need some help there. So enter the raincoat and umbrella. Sure, you'll have to vanquish deer clops to make the hat and handle some hentai for the coat, but either is totally worth the trouble, as both will provide 100% resistance to wetness for the player. This means no wetness gained from any of the sources listed here today, as well as having any wetness that you already have begin to lower. Great stuff. We do have alternatives, however. The Pretty Parasol or the Umbrella, and they are your earlier/easier tickets to 50% and 90% wetness resistance, respectfully. Both have their place, but neither will stop wetness completely, and that's where other water-resistant clothing comes into play. Darn near every hat in the game offers at least 20% resistance to wetness, even head armors, while some even armor slot gear falls under the same category. Learn some combinations of items and enjoy 100% resistance to wet. But before we wrap for the day, one final note here. Without any gear to resist it, WX-78 will take 0.5 damage every 3 to 5 seconds when wet. Nothing too significant, but could add up eventually. So, just best to have at least something to resist some wetness to reduce the overall damage taken, or just prevent it altogether and no damage will be taken. And there you have it, everyone. The wetness status effect in Don't Starve Together. Simple, yet far-reaching. Keep it managed or suffer the consequences. Thanks for watching, folks. Well wishes to all. Stay dry out there. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.